12 o'clock low. Coming up on 340, 12 o'clock. We're at
DCS has been evolving in leaps and bounds in the last few years with a plethora of maps, campaigns, user-generated content, and a vast array of aircraft available from both Eagle Dynamics and its various third-party affiliates, except these guys right now. Well, at least the map is still in play, and that's good news. That issue, though, is a separate one from the thrust of our video today, which focuses on the characteristics of a good module. Over the years, I've seen many videos pushing newer players towards a purchase by highlighting which is the best full-fidelity module to start out with in DCS. With the current state of the game, and there being so many modules, as well as packs like Flaming Cliffs series, and like the Flaming Cliffs series, and even free aircraft when you first download the game, I don't believe that's a satisfactory means of paring down what makes a particular module great. It's far too easy to give a warped perspective based on your own experiences, or certainly perceptions, and just like the real world, aircraft have strengths and weaknesses when stacked against each other. In other words, it's not an apples-to-apples comparison rating the Spitfire against the F-16. The aircraft and the modules need to stand on their own merits, sometimes even within the era in which they existed and the purpose for which they were created. A better question then perhaps is, what makes a great DCS module? Within this broad arc, which isn't absent of bias even with the best intent, there are several categories I'm using to flesh out the answer. Firstly, the general aesthetic of the aircraft, the flight model, the attention to detail, and its usability within DCS world, and one other factor we'll come to later. Let's look at this general aesthetic look. The question is, has the team taken the time to really represent the aircraft's artistic modeling in a way that lends an authenticity both inside and outside the cockpit? The standard of modeling today has risen considerably thanks to the use of things like laser scanning and photogrammetry, helping artists deliver not only an authentic-looking aircraft, but also highly accurate representations of each aircraft's exterior and interior. The high degree of detail now means we have the correct proportions and locations of just about every possible cockpit item. Indeed, this has become even more important, I believe, with more users conducting their flight activities in VR, which is a growing segment within flight simulation and simulation in general. Now, that experience absolutely blows you away when it comes to feeling immersed or strapped into the cockpit and the aircraft, which a monitor-based experience simply can't deliver, even though it is a pretty good experience in the 2D interface. The aircraft also needs to hit the numbers in different environments in terms of lighting and location while either flying or even on the ground static. The module can't feel out of place in the environment. Textures and different liveries should behave in a manner we expect them to when flying and operating in different environments, with different paint schemes delivering variation, surface textures, and so on and so forth, delivering the aesthetic realism we've come to expect from modules, especially in the last several years. A good example was a few years ago when Nick Gray forced the Mosquito team to redo the artwork on that module as he was dissatisfied with what they had come up with for an early access release. The decision forced a significant delay in the release of the product, but it was clearly the right decision as the Mozzie looks absolutely fantastic. Currently, the only missing ingredient perhaps of an extra piece to the aesthetic environment is the wet skin look, wherein water droplets on static aircraft or spray while it rolls on a runway or takes off from a runway, etc., isn't currently properly modeled, or fully modeled at least. While you can see raindrops on the canopy, you won't really see that wet skin look as you would expect to see in some other AAA titles. Now that's a game engine component I'd love to see, although at the end of the day, it's not a high priority one in the grand scheme of things. It is, as I say, purely aesthetic, but those things do matter when you're looking for whiz-bang experiences, and experiences in the environment that really, again, fool the eye into making you believe that you're really there. Perhaps one of the most important components outside of just the general look of an aircraft is the flight modeling. As many of you probably heard in my interview with Grinelli Designs a month or so ago regarding their F-100D Super Sabre, the development of a realistic flight model remains one of the more challenging aspects to implement in-game. Some of this pertains to the general complexity of injecting, testing, and quality assurance processes associated with measuring accurate flight model data performance. What's going on in the game? Does it match the real-world performances? How do we get there? What's going wrong? How do we test it? The variability of consumer flying activity means thousands of hours are needed to correctly model and measure whether the aircraft is going to behave in a manner consistent with that real-world data, presuming that you have it. And more importantly, can that real-world data be recreated by the DCS physics system within the game and still provide the illusion of realism given the limitations of things like mass and g-force, buffeting forces, and, as I said, the almost infinite variability of individuals abusing a particular airframe. As we saw with the Super Sabre interview, in some cases too, and I mentioned this just before, we know that data from old airframes is not always readily available. Sometimes it's lost to time, or it has been destroyed for whatever reason. So even in the information age, not everything remains necessarily recorded. In simple terms, there must be enough suspension of disbelief in the aircraft flight modeling that, again, fools the eyes and the brain of the customer, that makes them believe this is how the aircraft would behave to my presumably untrained eye. And if you're a real pilot, you will definitely be looking for this. Does it behave as it would in the real world? And we've seen people like Mover, for example, who used to fly the F-16, give feedback to Eagle Dynamics about the general handling characteristics. Again, not scientifically, but impression-wise, as to how he remembers the aircraft flying in the real world. And we know that there is a high degree of accuracy within the limitations of the video game and other caveats that come with that. Now, we see tweaking in this area a lot as teams fine-tune their models based on customer feedback, SME input, new information, or even changes to the core engine. It is, to a greater or lesser degree, something of a working model depending on the individual aircraft. One of the things that helps embellish this whole experience, of course, is the aural input. As you fly around in the jet, you have to have the accompaniment of cockpit sounds, such as the roar of the engine, the buffeting and ambient noises, which brings the entire experience to life.
About 20 miles northwest is the Tonopah Test Range Airfield at our 2 o'clock. If things go south during the exercise, you can use it as an emergency field. Silverbow Tower is on channel 13. Make sure you have a damn good reason if you land there. We have some hush-hush stuff going on out there, and there will be questions. You can be sure of that.
It will be very sterile and boring without those things. And again, the aural sensory experience has to match what your eyes are seeing as well. Again, helping to create this illusion that we are strapped into the jet. Now, all of these traits and characteristics, I believe, come under, I guess, the broad arc of attention to detail. How many layers has the team been able to add to their complex piece of machinery to satisfy, hopefully, even the most discerning customers? Some of this complexity is represented particularly in the modern jets, where the complexity is inherent in the consolidation efforts as the analog moved into the digital era. So we have multifunction displays, which removed a lot of old steam dials, switches, and old-fashioned buttons from, as I said, that analog flight era. There is a weird degree of programming within the programming. We're flying with our Gen 4 aircraft and potentially down the line, the 5th gen rendition of the F-35, which represents something of a departure from what ED has traditionally been focusing on. But I think it also, again, shows an evolution in the game, even if some people question the rationality for that. But as we've seen even with Hippler's Phantom II, the analog era has a withering array of systems which must be modeled and potentially modeled to fail. Far from reducing complexity and the need for attention to detail, such aircraft present a different degree of challenges to model for developers. We've seen this with ED's World War II damage model and engine management systems, which require persistent pilot oversight for fear of, say for example, cooking the oil, burning off liquid, and seizing an engine. And that's all before you've reached cruising altitude or plonk yourself right in the sights of an enemy aircraft's crosshairs. Manual bombing, dead reckoning navigation, and other nuances associated with driving pre-GPS machinery bring different challenges for the player, which can be as rewarding as mastering the MFDs of the modern jets. And if that's not your alley, well, you can still take a little peek at the F10 map if you're becoming overwhelmed. The last category, well worth considering when assessing the value of a module, is the available content, which you can use to deploy your favorite aircraft within. This is where brand new or early access modules have a distinct disadvantage. While it doesn't necessarily detract from all of the work that a developer has done or sunk into the module to bring it to life, there is often a little bit of a content gap for a while until such time either the developer, third-party campaign makers, or community-generated content breathes additional purpose into the newer modules. Backbone content aircraft like the AE-10C-2 and its variants, the FA-18C and the F-14AB models, among others, as well as various World War II aircraft such as the Spitfire, have a broad library of campaigns and mission content spanning hundreds of hours of playtime across dozens of campaigns and missions. As I always say, it's well worth bundling sale items together to maximize your purchase value and accept that newer aircraft are likely going to have less out-of-the-box content, at least, as I said, until such time that changes. The one exception, perhaps, has been the Phantom II, which was practically adopted by reflected simulations whose passion for the aircraft quickly spawned 2 training-style campaigns almost back-to-back, which are well worth a look for those wanting to learn how this aircraft was properly flown or should be properly flown. One theme that seems to have occurred in recent module releases has been a desire by developers to release them largely mission-capable. The Phantom II and the Kiowa spring to mind in this instance. Now this is a big bonus for end users and campaign and mission makers who have a better chance of exploiting the features of the module much earlier than the traditional paths we've seen associated with very early access development processes and modules which aren't fully fleshed out and therefore hinder the ability to create said missions or are limiting the missions that can be created for the aircraft. It's possible that the release of a dynamic campaign will also help relieve that content gap for those newer modules and hopefully allow broader use of a newer aircraft, again, if they are largely mission capable. And we'll see if this theme continues with other aircraft planned here from Eagle Dynamics and the various third-party developers. There's another quotient we need to factor, and that's an accessibility one with regards to user interface, and this will be the last topic. As the degree of realism has continued to elevate, the number of input devices needed for some aircraft has increased exponentially. Some aircraft, such as the Apache, for example, with its front seat CPG controllers, have the potential to be overwhelming at first glance. The growth of flight sim equipment in recent years and modifiable input devices has been a solution for those with additional cash flow wanting ease of use, but this may be beyond the reach of some users and hamper enjoyment or even hinder the out-of-box experience. I can buy the module, but I can't use it because I don't have all of the controls I need to easily recreate the systems within the aircraft. Now, fortunately, the vast community of players is a wealth of solutions and resources to some of these problems, but it is fair to say that some aircraft, as I said, may require more from your periphery equipment than some players may have on hand and may find it restrictive when using portions of the aircraft and its full capability. I must say, though, the army of 3D printer folks out there coming up with custom controls that are too much of a niche for, say, some major brand manufacturers is very, very impressive. Some of the work that I've seen on the internet for aircraft like the Spitfire is an example, which, as far as I know, no major manufacturer is producing a flight stick for that particular aircraft, but I've seen tons of stuff from smaller independent manufacturers or individuals producing systems that can be used to interface with those particular aircraft, which is really cool. At the end of the day, beauty, I think, is in the beholder, so many players will buy an aircraft based on its popularity, its look, and what it's potentially capable of doing. As the list of aircraft grows and we're seeing more aircraft in niche roles, ones that don't even have radars, for example, or aircraft that provide CAS roles or scouting roles or transport roles. There's a good deal of variety out there which allows players to have access to something that perhaps wasn't available before and fills a much more interesting niche for individuals to get into a particular aircraft that wasn't there before. But as I said, it's good to point out these factors to decide if you're going to buy one of these. Does it meet my needs? Do I have the equipment to fly it? And is there enough entertainment outside of learning how to fly the module itself to keep me interested? DCS, of course, really shines when it comes to multiplayer or groups of players coming together to do specific things. That's where this game, as I said, really does take off.
So the CCD, we're looking for these two technicals. The CCD Maverick, they're going to stand out a little better, and same for the targeting pod.
But it is single player content which forms the backbone of the users within the game. So as I said, you'll have to decide which one is best for you, but I think these are some of the broad categories which separate good modules from ones that perhaps are more mediocre, especially as the game has evolved and some of the older modules look a little lackluster or need an upkeep. The Huey is an example. We've seen teams like Heatblur going back and re-injecting life into some of their older modules. So we'll see how this progresses. Let me know what your favorite aircraft is out there in the comment section below and what you like about it. We'll see you next time on the DCS SitRep.